I officially left my education when I was still only 15 years old.
Wow.
That early rejection kind of gave me that drive. And it was hard, but it made me incredibly ambitious. It took me 10 years from the end of my master's to getting my book deal.
Incredible.
There's something in me that will always feel like I'm not quite enough. I still worry that it is a fluke, which, I have imposter syndrome.
2013, which was about 11 years ago, Queen's Gambit. You were about 50 years old when you finally got your big book deal.
Yeah, I was 50 when it all happened. So, I've been lucky enough to have a great kind of flourishing in my career in my later life.
You are listening to My Rejection Story, hosted by Alice Draper. Quick one, this episode forms part of a 3-part series where I interview fiction authors. This series includes interviews with Hayley Jacobson, Jill Mansell, and Elizabeth Fremantle. After that, I'll be going back to interviewing non-fiction authors, so if that's what you're more interested in, worry not, your content will be coming back to you soon. Cool, enjoy the episode.
Elizabeth, can you tell me about a time in your life when you felt rejected?
Okay, well, I can tell you about many. I'm going to go right back and I'm going to tell you about the time when I was expelled from school. I was actually expelled from 2 schools. So I officially left my education when I was still only 15 years old.
Wow.
And at the time I felt that the expulsions, I know you think, well, twice, that's, looking like a theme. It must have been something I was doing wrong. But I felt like they were quite unjustified. And I was, on both counts, expelled for being a bad influence. Whereas what happened was I kind of came to being a bit naughty rather late on. I come from a very, very messy family background. And in my kind of teenage years, I had a kind of, what would I call it? A kind of rebellion, but not a kind of really excessive one. But of course, and then I started sort of hanging with all the people who were the really naughty people at school. And because I was new to being naughty, I wasn't good at getting myself out of punishments. So whenever everybody got caught for something, it was always me left kind of standing there with my, with my hands dirty. So the kind of, it became a kind of misapprehension that I was the ringleader of all these things, whereas actually I was kind of tagging along, trying to be cool. And so it didn't really work out for me. And that was a real problem, having finished my education so young, because I really, really wanted to be a writer. And of course, I didn't feel I could be a writer unless I had finished my education. So I eventually, in my 30s, I went back to university and studied as a mature student. So, to people out there who have that kind of early rejection and early problems in their education, there's always a way back from it. That's a message I like to put out there. I studied as a mature student. I did a degree in English literature. I had to do a year's course to get me back on track so I could get into a degree course. And then I went on and I did a master's in creative writing. So that's my early rejection. Yeah.
I love that so much. So when you were rejected from school, what was it exactly that you were rejected for? Do you remember? Like when you were expelled from school?
Well, I was expelled for being a bad influence when when you feel these injustices in life and they kind of stay with you, was that really I was not a bad influence. I was very easily caught up in other people's bad behavior, and some of it not so bad. I went to very, very strict girls' boarding schools, and so it was very easy to get in trouble. Nowadays, people would look at what I'd done and think it was absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
It was the days of punk. I dyed my hair green with acrylic paint from the art room, and that was a mistake. Please don't try that at home. It was all kind of tacky and nasty. And, so I was really just, I guess, in a way, trying to express myself. And it was a misunderstanding. So, that always feels a kind of a rejection of one's true self.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, going through that period of trying to express or explore your identity and then getting expelled from school, especially when you have literary ambitions, can really shape the way you view yourself. Did you have a narrative about yourself that perhaps from that you are not someone who's going to be literary or
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think, those kind of events in life, they not only do they restrict your future in terms of, you haven't got the correct qualifications but it's also about what you believe about yourself intrinsically. That I felt that my lack of education must mean that I'm not up to the grade. And actually, I worked very, very hard to prove that wrong. I felt like I had to prove it to the world, but really I was proving it to myself. And in fact, when I went on to do my degree in English literature, I won the prize for English. I got the best degree in the college. So I felt I proved that to myself. But in some ways, that desire to prove myself has been a driving force. So in a sense, that early rejection kind of gave me that drive. And it was hard, but it made me incredibly ambitious and feel the need that I had to prove to the world that I was up to scratch and that I could do it. So, it's not always negative.
And as you're saying that, it makes me think there's a study, and I'm trying to remember I can't remember what university, but a professor did a study on students in a university and found that students who were immediately rejected were far more likely to come up with more innovative ideas than those who were accepted. Like there was almost like was kind of like ambition that was fueled by having your idea shut down of like, oh, I'm going to prove you wrong. I need to prove my worth. And it sounds like there was something similar that happened to you post being expelled.
Yes, I think, that idea, I suppose there are responses to being told you're not good enough. And, in a sense, I suppose, really, really analysing it, the being sent at a very young age to boarding school is also a rejection. My siblings were not sent at such an early age as me. So on some level, that is a very early rejection on my part. And then, so I think if you are someone who becomes used to rejection, it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy in some ways. So I think that's really, really interesting. And I've heard actually that female mature students tend to be the most successful group of students in terms of grades and achievements. And I feel that that's because they are either dealing with early rejection, which is my case, or dealing with lack of expectation. Other people have less expectation on the kind of women that don't get to go to university I guess I'm talking from my generation. I'm now in my 60s. So my experience of growing up and going to school in an all-girls school, very, very few of my peer group went to university at all because the expectations were very, very small. You were kind of raised to, if you weren't sort of designated as super academic very early on, and if you were labeled as creative, which I was, then you're considered, it's a little bit lesser academically. There's no point going to university. You can go and learn to type, work as a secretary, and then get married. And of course, I resisted all of that vehemently and had to carve my own path. And I think that's a really interesting study you talk about, that rejection can be a driving force.
Yeah, because everything you're saying is very much the case as well, where rejection can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think that there's so much that goes into it. And that's partly kind of why I want to start this podcast, because I think everyone gets rejected in some shape or form. The question is, what are we doing with those rejections?
Yes.
And I'm curious, kind of, because you just alluded to resisting kind of what was expected from you in society, which was, if you're creative, you're not going to become the next doctor or, the valued fields of science, which is still was the case when I was in school. Like, if you were going to go on to study maths and science, that was considered serious and you were going to do well in life. And if you were going in a creative field, you were just like basically not good enough to do the hard things.
Yeah, which is not true, because, trying to carve a living out of one's creativity is incredibly difficult. I think if I'd known it would be that difficult before I aimed in that direction, I might not have chosen to do it. But, it's just always been a compulsion for me. I think when I did my degree, and I took to academic study very well, and it was successful for me. And then when I went on to do my master's degree, there was a kind of a fork in the road, and the obvious choice would have been to continue the academic work, to specialize, go on and do a doctorate, and work within academia within the study of English literature. And of course, I didn't choose that. The module on my degree that I had the least success in was creative writing. And of course, I chose to do that as my master's. And looking back, it was a mad choice. I chose to do that. It was difficult. I was by no means the star student on my master's degree, whereas I had been one of the stars of the course on my BA. So in a way, I was again setting myself up for rejection, but I had held this childhood desire to be a writer and to write a writer of fiction, because I was one of those kids who, I sought solace always in a book. It was my place to go to. It was my sanctuary. And it was the only thing I really, really ever desperately wanted to do. And once I had finished my master's, I'd written a novel. I managed to get an agent straight away, and I thought, yes, this is it. All the cycles of rejection are over. This is it. I've made it. And of course, that first novel was rejected by every editor, practically every editor in the English-speaking world. So again, I was facing rejection. Possibly because I'd set my sights so high. I think trying to be a successful published writer of fiction is incredibly hard. Very few people manage to do it. And I think I kind of walked into that very blindly. I thought, well, I can do it. I've proven that I can turn around those life rejections in the past, so I can do it this time. And by the time I'd kind of put myself on that road, I thought, well, I've got to keep trying. And I wrote 2 further novels. Both of those novels were rejected by many, many editors. I always had an agent, which was a great help. I think if I hadn't had an agent, I might have given up sooner. But I kept going because I think I sort of got myself so far down that path. I thought, well, I can't stop now. I've got to keep trying to make it happen. But 3 novels, all rejected. And then the 4th, I was kind of struggling to make ends meet at that time. I was doing a lot of freelance work. I was reading for a literary scout. I was doing some copywriting. I was, you'd call it a portfolio career, but it wasn't bringing in a lot of money. I was struggling a bit. And I had this idea for a book, and I thought, okay, this one, if I can't make this one happen, then I've got to stop. And that was the one that was published, that I got the publishing deal. It was sold internationally, and it was the one that was the beginning of my career as a writer. But it took me 10 years from from the end of my master's to getting my book deal.
Incredible. So a few things come up here. One is, you said you had this vision, and looking back, maybe it was a little bit naive because so few people are going to become very successful fiction authors. But I wonder how much that vision actually contributed to the fact that you're here and you are a successful fiction author. Because if you didn't have it, if you weren't so convinced that, you were going to get this work out there, perhaps you would have given up a lot sooner. And then the other one that kind of I just thought of, and you can chime in and tell me that I'm right, wrong, whatever. But I was just thinking, kind of as you were talking, is I was wondering if writing those books and getting them rejected is what actually made The Queen's Gambit so good, because you had so much practice in writing.
For sure. I think to answer the first question, I really I didn't feel that there was anything else I would be really, really good at. Somehow, though I was being rejected with those novels, I just felt, in terms of my personality, who I am, I really have an aptitude for doing what I do. And I kind of felt that intrinsically, that even though I couldn't find that kind of sweet spot where I had some encouragement or success, somehow, though I'm not a person who's hugely self-confident by nature, somehow felt essentially that's what I had to do. So that is what kept me going. And as for learning, I think nearly every writer I know had a number of manuscripts rejected. And it's such a huge opportunity to learn. It's what honed me as a writer. Yeah. And also, I was doing a job reading for a literary scout. So I had to read and report on a manuscript, like sometimes within a single day. So I'd have to read a novel, write a report.
Wow.
And you're making decisions about why a book does or doesn't work, where it fits in the market. I was learning all about the market, the book market, what was selling, what wasn't selling. I was absorbing all that. I was also absorbing kind of really, really important lessons about what makes a novel work, how to plot and pace. You learn so much reading other people's work. So yes, because all those rejections forced me to carry on doing that reading job, which was so badly paid, but it was enormously helpful as an education. And the only way to really learn to write is to read a lot, and not necessarily within your own genre. I think you have to read quite widely, and that job gave me that experience. I was reading all sorts of things, from chick lit to literary fiction, crime, fantasy. I got a kind of sense of all the different perspectives on fiction, and primarily what really sells and what was the zeitgeist. And I think I'd read a number of historical novels doing that, and I had always wanted to write this book about Catherine Parr. So I kind of had developed a sort of spidey sense about the market, and I thought this is a good moment to do that. I had all sorts of short, I felt it might be problematic because I'm not a historian. I didn't feel I was qualified to jump into historical fiction about a real figure. Queen's Gambit is about Catherine Parr, the last wife of Henry VIII. And I felt that I wasn't properly equipped, or that I somehow didn't have the right to write that story. I'd been unsuccessfully writing contemporary fiction, but my agent just said, look, if that's what you feel really passionate about, she said, I can hear your passion when you talk about it. Go for it. You just have to do your research. So it was that really, I felt she gave me permission. And though really, I think nobody needs permission to write the thing they want to write. You just have to write it. But I felt I needed that permission. So that kind of put a little bomb up my bum. And yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. What I'm just thinking of some conversations I've had with people where they've said, like, you know, I'm really passionate about XYZ, but who am I to talk about this? I'm not a psychologist, or I'm not. And often my advice is like, root it in what you do know. Like, you know, that often this is like, they know their personal story. You know your story. You can write with authority on your own story and what you went through. So I love that you had that kind of push to do it, and you learn. You're a good researcher. Most writers are good researchers, and that's kind of what historians do, right? They research. You're kind of putting that into practice. So to backtrack a little bit, you spoke about feeling rejected, being sent to boarding school quite young, and that your siblings weren't sent to boarding school very young. So can you tell me like a little bit about your early life? I know you grew up in Hampstead in the UK, early childhood. What was your background and how did that shape you?
Well, that's interesting. I come from a kind of a complicated background. My father was 28 years older than my mother.
Okay, wow.
And so he was quite elderly when I have 3 full siblings and 2 half siblings who were the same age as my mum.
Okay, wow.
So there's a big generation gap. There was a lot of conflict in the background of my family. My father came from a very well-to-do family, and my mother came from completely the wrong side of the tracks. She was a foundling. She knows nothing about her background, and she was adopted into, she was kind of semi-adopted into a family as an only child of much older. They weren't really parents. She called them aunt and uncle. It was kind of complicated. So I think my mother suffered very, very extreme rejection. She was left on the steps of a children's home aged 2. And so imagine that. I feel like in some ways, you know, rejection can be intergenerational. And I think, and of course, you know, a marriage with a huge age gap like that is often going to be problematic. And their marriage didn't last. So I think she probably felt a huge sense of rejection as a result of that as well. So I think perhaps that rejection carried over to the next generation. She had a personality, kind of tricky personality, that I think she was terribly defensive. So people constantly pushed her away, or she pushed them away. And I think her life was very difficult as a result of that. She never felt accepted into my father's milieu, and she wasn't. She was always thought of as, you know, the woman who came from the wrong background, and so I think she lived with that. And I think, you know, you pass that on, really. I mean, it's interesting. It's funny because I hadn't really thought of that until you asked me this question, that how these things, you know, can really go back in time. I mean, they say that, you know, you inherit trauma. And I think rejection can be part of that in some ways.
Absolutely. I mean, I completely like that's something I believe very strongly, and I think of trauma as kind of the ultimate rejection is having, and yeah, I kind of wonder, you often see kind of if a deeply traumatized person often traumatizes people without intending to. It's just what you know. So I would imagine that having faced the ultimate rejection where you can face, which is your own parents abandoning you. And I'm thinking like also, I don't know if you ever read Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Keeps the Score, but the trauma you experience, and according to him, kind of the research he's done, the trauma you experience in early childhood has a much more profound effect on your entire life's trajectory than if you had a very good early childhood and then experienced a very traumatic event later on in life. So he referenced one study where it was like the first 1 year of a child's life. I can't remember, was it 1 year or 90 days? It was something very small. If they had a very, very good, like nurtured, had everything kind of that an infant needs, and then were put into a traumatic environment where maybe they were being like abused or neglected or whatever, they would be more well-adjusted in adulthood than someone who had a terrible first period of their life and then was put in the most loving home.
That's really interesting. I'm not aware of that notion. It's really interesting. I mean, it sets my brain cells thinking. But I do have a very, very strong sense that, and I had I guess, a difficult childhood. You don't think it's difficult when you're in it because you're in it and that is all you know. But look, when I compare my experience to other people's, it was a series of challenges. But I am really, really grateful to my background because it made me very tough. And it made me, that it's that kind of strange combination of the kind of lack of self-confidence, but an incredible tenacity and determination. And then I think also each time you overcome a rejection, you get stronger and you believe more that you can overcome future rejections. So perhaps that's why I really persevered with the writing.
Yeah.
After rejection, I continued. And then there's an element of luck. Yes, I persevered. Yes, I did the work. But lots of people do the work and they write and write and write and they have enough talent. They have enough discipline. They do everything it takes and it doesn't happen for them. So I am one of the people it did happen for. And there's a lot of luck in that, a lot of luck and timing. That Queen's Gambit, I was submitting Queen's Gambit just when Hilary Mantel was starting to have her huge success with her Tudor novels. So the market was looking for things like that. So, that's timing. That might be because I had a sense that something was happening in that field because I'd been reading for the Scouts, so, a lot of things just fell into place for me and it happened. And I'm grateful, so grateful for that. I feel that I had a lot of luck where other people I know, quite close friends of mine who are writers who have not managed to get published, the universe hasn't aligned for them where it did for me. And but it's still, however much success I have, I always feel like it's not quite enough, which is interesting. I don't know how to explain that. I always feel I have to continue striving that, if I talk to myself 20 years ago and they would say, my now self would say, well, there's been a Hollywood film made of one of your books with two extraordinary actors, made by a filmmaker who's a true artist, and you would have published 7 novels and have 2 more in the pipeline. I think that's more than my dreams come true. And it is my dreams come true, but I still feel somehow I haven't quite achieved enough. And I don't know what that's about. It's the thing that keeps me going, I guess.
Do you know that I give away a copy of every author who comes on this show's book? All you have to do to enter is subscribe to the podcast, review it, send me a screenshot at media@hustlingwriters.com and tell me which book you're answering for. And I might just be mailing you a copy of the book, but also you're helping me grow a show that I am so passionate about, so delusional about. I wanted to be on Times Square. I want to be interviewing the biggest and best authors, and I need all the help I can to get there. Your subscribe means the world. Your review means the world. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And let's resume with the episode.
Yeah. I mean, when you told me the story just now earlier about, being expelled from school and that kind of set a fire in you to prove yourself, I thought like that makes total sense. I think we all need something that kind of pushes us. But I'm curious now, like what is still pushing you? Do you think that it's having greater impact with your books? Or do you think that it's that you're looking for something through external validation that you can't really get externally?
I think the second. I think that's very astute. There's something in me that will always feel like I'm not quite enough. And it's so no matter, if I had the most successful book of the year, I'd still feel it wasn't quite enough. There's something that's deeply ingrained in my personality that will never quite be satisfied. And so I think, interestingly, as I've got older, and I'm 62 now, and I think it's waned a little bit. I feel that I can now look back and think, yeah, I've achieved a lot. I've more than achieved my dreams. I'm really lucky to be able to say that. And you sort of, as you become older, you start to think about, will I look back on my life and feel I've done enough? I've always got that little bit of me that says, no, you need to achieve more. But it's less pressing when you get older, I feel, or certainly in my case, which is a relief because, that drive can be exhausting, and it can be, create more and more and more rejection because, you're never, that sense of achievement is not something real. It's something imagined. Yeah. So I need to kind of shut that part of myself up occasionally.
I was just thinking kind of when you were saying that, yeah, sorry, actually, then my brain just blipped. I'm going to have to edit this bit out. It's just completely blipped on the question I was going to ask you. What I wanted to know is having that sense that it's not quite enough. Did that make rejections harder or to deal with when they came early in your career? Like, do you remember reading into rejections as almost confirming this thought that you had that it's not quite enough? Or what was your relationship with those early rejections that you would have gotten before Queen's Gambit was picked up?
Okay, that's a really good question. I haven't really thought about it, but my instinct is to say I'm lucky enough to be a very pragmatic by nature and a realist. So though the rejections, don't get me wrong, they're a stab to the heart when you've given your everything to writing a novel and nobody wants to publish it. It's tough, but I have a very good capacity to be able to say, draw a line, move on, write another one. And I think it's that capacity, and I suppose thinking about it, I've seen that in my life, it's like with relationships, it's like someone dumps you, okay, move on. And I have that capacity. And perhaps that does come from my childhood So that has helped me in some ways to be very unsentimental about the rejections. You know, yeah, it hurts, but you move on. And I think with each rejection, you learn that again and again and again, and it gets easier each time.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I think that we can habituate to rejections. So I think that if we are keep like continuously taking those actions and getting rejected, it's a little bit like getting into a really cold pool or sea or something. It's really painful. And then you kind of stop feeling it. Yeah. But if you get out and get it back in again, it's going to be painful. Yeah. So if you take a break from the rejections, but you have that muscle memory to know, oh, I've done the cold plunge before. I know my body is capable of this, and I know we can get back into that state of, habituating to the cold water.
That's interesting. I'm really into cold water swimming. Maybe that's no coincidence.
Maybe not.
Yeah. And I think, I think somehow I've been able to adopt a capacity to see things that would appear detrimental to be the things that are formative, that are opportunities. I think I do have, I have a large dose of that ability, which has seen me in good stead.
Yeah. And to touch on what you said about working as you were reviewing novels, I can't remember quite what the role was, but you were reading a lot of novels. I think as a writer, getting yourself in a position where you are doing the job of what you want someone to say yes to you for. It's a very good position to get in because, as you said, you get so much market research and you start being able to think like a publisher or an editor. I did it for free, like not as books, but for articles. I worked as a submissions reader for 9 months just to literally understand what goes through the mind when you're choosing articles so that I can pitch better articles and write better articles. So I love that so much. So when you got Queen's Gambit, let's first start with what was that what was that process of getting a book deal for Queen's Gambit? I know it was published in 2013, kind of what happened in between then to get the book finally published?
Well, I wrote a draft. I did all the research. I mean, crazy research. I did more research than I've ever done for a subsequent novel because I felt like I really had to make myself an expert. And then I wrote a first draft, and then my agent was like, I don't think this really works. And I thought, oh, here we go again. And she said, maybe you should write something else. I thought, no, I can't. Because I'd said to myself, if I don't make this work, that's it, I'm giving up. So I said, I can't write something else. I've got to make this work. And she went, well, it's on your head. Go make it work then. And what I did was I got some help from a freelance editor who was fantastic. And she gave me some really good suggestions about, and she was quite expensive, but worth every penny. She said, look, I can see what's not working about this. It's structural, it's this, that, and the other. And she made some suggestions. I wrote the next draft, and my agent said, yeah, I think we can make this work. I'm going to send it out. So that was already, it's like, way, all the kind of fantastic, excited explosions were going off in my head. It was like, yes, this is a, next step. And it all happened quite quickly from there. So rather than, I thought, well, it's going out, but I know what to expect and expect that it's going to be rejected by a lot of people, but, kind of maintain the hope. She came back to me within a week and she said, we've got an offer. And she said, I was out walking my dog and I picked up my phone. She said, are you sitting down? I thought, okay, well, it's either really good or really bad. So I found a bench. I said, right, I'm sitting down. Now you can tell me. She said, we've got an offer, but we're not going to accept this one because we're going to get more offers, and just be prepared. There's going to be an auction for your book. And it was like, oh my God, this is, beyond my wildest dreams. So several publishers wanted it and they had to bid for it. It was just, the most exciting whirlwind. It was 12 years ago now. The most thrilling, exciting whirlwind where, I had to go around and meet different editors. And ultimately, I had to decide which one I wanted to go with. And they had to go to a thing called Best Bids. It was just nuts. Really, it was amazing because, it was what you hope is going to happen, but you never think it will. I would have been happy for, to get a little modest deal, but I got a really great deal. I got then a deal in the States. So again, it was another kind of mad night there was no Zoom then. And so I had to make these calls like really late in the evening because of the time difference. And I'm not great on the phone. I like to be able to see who I'm speaking to. So these editors were trying to kind of convince me that they were the best one to go with. And it was a mad moment, really exciting, thrilling. And, and it all snowballed from there, really. But, I've also, after that, written books. And as I said, I went on. So I had initially a 3-book deal. And then I had a 4-book deal. And I've only just come to the end of that 4-book deal. Disobedient, my most recently published book, which is probably the one I hold most dear. It's the one that's the most personal to me and my story, that's about a historical figure, Artemisia Gentileschi, who's an artist in the early 17th century in Rome. There's something in her story that really, really chimes with my story. And so it's very, very close to me. But so I've written a lot of books since then and published a lot of books. And of course, some of them have done better than others. Some haven't done that well at all. And some I have felt they would do really well and they haven't. So if you're a writer, you're going to be rejected all the time. You're going to have bad reviews. You're going to... Actually, you should never read your Amazon reviews because people on Amazon, they say what they think and they're entitled to. If you're not thick-skinned, just steer clear. And, each of those, when someone says, sometimes someone will get in touch with you on Twitter and they'll say, I didn't like your book. You think, why are you telling me that? But it's hard to take.
Yeah, I actually want to know about that because, I think that one of the scarier parts about doing well and being visible is that now people are going to not like what you're doing. Because if no one's reading your book, no one's going to say your book sucks because no one's reading the book. Or if you publish a book and 50 of your friends read it, so you'll probably only get lovely feedback. But if you publish a book and thousands of people read it, some people are going to give not so nice feedback. That's just the nature of being visible. So what has been your relationship with that, like that visibility and the kind of scary parts of it being visible, which is...
I think every writer is sensitive about how their work is going to be received because you put so much of yourself into your writing. And I think with reviews in the press, you just have to take it on the nose because these are experts and they're entitled to their opinion. It can hurt terribly. And sometimes you feel they've misinterpreted, they haven't understood what I was trying to do. But if they haven't understood what you're trying to do, it's because you haven't done it well enough. You have to accept that in many ways. So you kind of learn to take it. I think sometimes people can be quite vicious on social media unnecessarily, and people can be quite, they can get into, or you can find a thread where two people might be discussing what they don't like about your work, and that is hard. So I tend to just not really go there because it's not helpful to me, but people are entitled to say what they think. Readers are entitled to their opinions, and they're entitled to discuss them on an open platform. So I just try and back off a bit and rather not read it, not look at it, because it's hard. It's hard to, it's like someone saying, yeah, your baby's ugly. I don't like it.
How dare you?
Yeah. And you can't expect to please everybody. My work is only going to appeal to a small fraction of society. There will be lots of people that won't like it. And that's perfectly normal. I can't, there's no way I can please everyone. And I think when I do come across kind of really quite, damning reviews on, say, on Amazon or Goodreads, I tend to avoid Goodreads because people are super frank on Goodreads. I always, my way of dealing with it is I go to someone who I consider is a master of their craft. So often I'll go on to Hilary Mantel's reviews, and she gets 1-star reviews too. And that makes me feel a lot better.
I interviewed Jill Mansell for the podcast, and she said something similar, where she said she goes and looks at like very good authors and sees that they also got bad reviews, and it's like, okay,
yeah,
I'm not terrible.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really smart strategy, and I think just having those boundaries, just around not going down a whirlwind. I haven't written a book, but I've had times where I've written articles, and then you just get like thousands and thousands of comments on social media. Everyone like saying how stupid and pathetic and stuff you are, and it's like you kind of have to just be like, okay, I'm just not going to look at these. This is not productive, and it's not going to help me get better at this, because that's not why people are commenting on that piece.
Yeah, I think it's, if you listen to too much criticism, you lose sense of what it is you're trying to do, and you have to accept that everybody's going to receive your work in a different way. And that, if you have valued critics, listen to them. It's like I don't show my early work to friends, one, because they'll all just say, oh, it's really great. I show it to two people. I show it to my agent. I show it to my editor. I really respect their opinion. My editor is the toughest editor. She really says what she thinks. And I take it from her because I know she's helping me shape my work to be better, and I really trust her. So I think, if you feel you're going to learn from what people are saying below the line, then read it. But often it's not going to be helpful.
Yeah, I completely agree. And yeah, there's a kind of difficult line where it's like you can learn from criticism, and you can also be derailed from criticism. So I love your approach of knowing who the trusted people are that you can like learn from and build on your story for that. So I have one quick question, and then I want to ask you a little bit about your film. But you said that you Queen's Gambit did really well, and then some of your other books didn't do as well. And I'm very interested in this idea of like, there's rejection before you've kind of quote unquote made it. And that's a unique kind of rejection. It can be difficult, but for some people, like for me, I think it's easier because there's not a lot of people looking at you, but then there's rejection after you've made it. And now you feel like you could feel like you're kind of held to this new standard. And so to have a book do really well and then another book do not as well, it's like, do you ever worry, like, what if this is like my, what if I was like a one-hit wonder, and like, what if I don't have it anymore, or kind of those sorts of fears?
Every time I worry about that. I worry that it was a fluke. I mean, even 7 books in, I still worry that it's a fluke, which, I have imposter syndrome. I think it's, it's just all part of the kind of collection of neuroses that one has as a writer, putting your work out in the public arena. I want to be published. So those are the things that come with it. And also, when I look back more dispassionately at the books that have done less well, I can understand why. sometimes it's the market. Sometimes, I think I've written a number of books set in the Tudor period. The Tudor period's very appealing to people still, always. I've had various theories about that. And I've written 2 novels set in the Jacobean period. To me, it's just as exciting a period. And my books, one of them, I think, is one of the best books I've written. They didn't do as well not because I failed, but because the market wasn't so warm to the subjects I chose. So I think it's not necessarily always because of my failings as a writer, but because of other outside reasons. Historical fiction can be having a difficult time. COVID, I had a book come out in COVID. It was, I feel like it kind of slid in and out and barely anyone noticed it. And there were outside reasons for that. And, I think it makes me all the more pleased when a book does hit the spot. Like Disobedient, my book I was talking about Artemisia Gentileschi. People loved that book. And I'm so glad because it was so very personal to me. I think if people had hated that book, it would have been equally hard to take. So you kind of have to learn to take the rough with the smooth if you're putting your work out there.
You have to learn to take the rough with the smooth if you're putting your work out there. I just love that so much. But I think you highlighted something really important, which is something we forget when we get rejected, which is that there's a lot of other factors at play outside of what we're producing, which, as you mentioned, COVID. Like during COVID, a lot of things didn't do well, as like the whole world market seems to shut down.
Yeah.
And, historical fiction. So anyone is getting rejected. I think it's very easy to take it so personally, but then there's the person on the rejecting end has many reasons. And that's, I think, doing that kind of role of like submissions reading or something is when you really learn that, because you're like, oh, there's actually all these times I have to reject these really good pieces because that something just ran that was on a similar topic, and we can't have a similar topic again in the same month. Kind of.
I think it's really important not to take rejection personally. Otherwise, you're never gonna you're gonna lose your drive. You will lose all hope.
Yeah.
And I think it's, for me, it was very helpful, and it sounds like it was also helpful for you too, to get that understanding of the market in which you're trying to achieve some success. That the market has its own whims, and it can be completely outside forces that can make something a success or not.
Yeah. And so you got your book turned into a film, Firebrand, and starring Jude Law. And you mentioned, I think I heard you kind of mention that getting a book turned into a film has a lot of external things at play that can make it very difficult. And so many successful books like got film rights and then it fell through. I think you highlighted The Secret History by Donald Hart. So tell me a little bit about that. What was that like, getting your book made into a film?
My God. Well, so the book was, Queen's Gambit was optioned before it was published. And that was a kind of exciting moment, though. I know enough people who work in and around the film business to know that so many books get optioned and so few make it to the screen. So I thought, well, it probably won't ever happen. I limited my expectations greatly. I sort of thought, well, I hope it happens, probably never will. And if it does, it'll take 10 years. That was kind of right. But I had got to the point, I think the option has to be renewed every 18 months. And so the film company, they have to show that they are still, working towards bringing that film to screen, that book to screen. And so it was renewed and it was renewed, and they kept renewing it. And then it was a final renewal. And I got in touch with my agent. I said, I think there it is up for renewal soon, isn't it? And she said, it's been a long time. I don't think this one's going to happen. And lo and behold, then I get the call saying, yep, we're casting it. It's happening. So, even that, I think the film business is even more than publishing, even more difficult to make something happen because so many different factors come into play. All the planets have to be aligned with the cast, the director, the finance. There's so many different elements. Whereas a book, I just have to write the best book I possibly can. And then, it's down to the publishing house and the market. Whereas a film, there's so much else. And even that film premiered in Cannes, not this year, but the year before. And so even that, it took a while to get this film that was, in the main competition in Cannes, was already having some success to actually get it into cinemas. It was hard work on the part of the producers to make that happen, even at that late stage.
Yeah.
So, it feels like a miracle and it feels like a dream. And I'm still kind of pinching myself as I'm seeing it now coming out. I've been doing Q&As in cinemas. It's been, I've been on cloud nine. Yeah.
How cool that I'm talking to you, because it's actually playing in a cinema in Norwich. I'm going to go watch it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, do go, because I think it's a terrific film. It's very, very different from my book. I think people who know the book very well might think, gosh, this is not what I was expecting. But in some ways, I think a work, it's its own work. It has to work on its own terms, and it's the director's vision.
I was going to ask you, what was that like? Because you've created this vision and you've created this book, and there is some letting go of that in the process of it being made into a film. Was that scary? Did you like what you saw? Like, how did you kind of navigate those feelings of letting someone else now take control of your vision?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think because it's, because of the 10 years, I think everything in my life seems to take 10 years. Because of that decade, I think I've got some distance between myself and the book. That book was my baby. It was my first book to be published. And at the time, I was asked if I wanted, what kind of involvement I wanted with the adaptation. And I said, I just signed this 3-book deal. I knew I had to write 2 more books. I was wondering if I was capable. And it was all very new to me. So I said, I don't want to be involved at all. I'm really prepared for you to go and make the film you're going to make. And I somehow knew I needed to let go of it completely. But I think if the film had come out sooner, or if it had been much closer to the plot of my book, I might have liked it less. I think what I like about it is that this director has come in and taken a completely different perspective. He's Brazilian, Karim is Brazilian, and he's seen the whole story through a different prism. And I love what he's done. There were times when I was always sent the screenplays, and it evolved greatly over time, and it changed a lot. And some of them I like better than others. And the final one, I read it and I thought, God, I don't understand how this is going to work at all. But then seeing the film, I see how it works totally on its own terms. And no, I think it's extraordinary. It bears strong relation to my book, particularly the characters. I think the central characters very much, I see the characters as I imagined them in my novel. Yeah. But it's sort of this hybrid of, someone else's vision.
So what I'm hearing, is that also having that distance between writing the book and the film being made is that you were able to let go a little bit. Yeah. Perhaps if it was very close, you would have been very attached. And that's just kind of symbolic of what creatives have to do when they let their work out into the world. Yeah. Is that a lot of people are going to, even if you don't get a film made, someone might take your writing and make like a YouTube skits or interpret it in other ways. Like creative work is now out for people to interpret as they want, and this can be difficult, I think, as the creator to see it not always interpreted in the way you visioned it when you created it.
I agree, but I think I'm naturally able to, I think I talked about it just now, about to let go. That, I wrote that book, they made that film, and now there are two things, and which to me is just a great joy. But yeah, that letting go, it comes quite naturally to me. I'm lucky, maybe.
I love that. So my final question for you, Elizabeth, is do you have any big rejection goals or risks you're planning to take for the next season of your life?
Okay, well, I'm trying to write a screenplay at the moment.
Yay.
So I'm really setting myself up for rejection there. Yeah. And expecting it. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, is screenplay completely new or adapting something you've already worked on?
It's actually an adaptation of one of my novels. I'm not really discussing it at this stage, but we'll see. We'll see. It's a skill I'm having to learn. It's completely different from writing a novel. And actually, I go back to on my MA in creative writing, I did a module in screenwriting. It was my least successful module. Can we see a pattern here? So I don't know. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm learning as I'm working. I'm doing a lot of research. I love film. I love cinema. It's something I had some aspirations when I was younger to go into filmmaking, which for various reasons, one being to do with my education, wasn't going to happen. But I love film. I watch a lot of films. I look at a lot of adaptations. If I look at an adaptation of a book and it's been adapted several times for the film, I'm thinking of, say, The Talented Mr. Ripley. I'm absolutely obsessed with Patricia Highsmith, who wrote the novel, and I have looked at all the adaptations of that book that I know of, in order to kind of have an understanding of how a book can be changed to be adapted. So, you teach yourself. Hopefully I'm teaching myself well.
A big believer in the beginner's mindset and continuously pushing ourselves into doing new things. And I love that you're still doing that. And also, I mean, you said earlier you're 61, so it just made me realize that if 2013, which was about 11 years ago, Queen's Gambit, you were about 50 years old when you finally got your big book deal.
Yeah. I was 50 when it all happened. So, I've been lucky enough to have a great kind of flourishing in my career in my later life. And so, I'm actually 62. I just turned 62.
Well, happy birthday.
That, I always want to set the bar for myself, give myself new challenges, because I think it just keeps your synapses firing. It keeps you, there's no reason. It's not dependent on my, my physical fitness to keep on writing. It's just dependent that my brain keeps firing on all cylinders, and setting myself those challenges is what keeps that going, I think.
It absolutely does. I'm very interested in brain health, and there's no better, one of the best ways to keep your brain healthy and alive is to keep challenging it with difficult things, like go learn a new language, and you'll keep your brain very active. So I just love that, because I think that a lot of people think that kind of you need to hit that like big success milestone in like your earlier career, and to know that, those dreams can come true at any stage of your life is just so important.
Yeah. So, that's the message I'd like to put out there. Yeah, that it's never too late.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for your time. This conversation's been absolutely wonderful. And if you're listening, you can order a copy of all of her books at your bookstores or online. I'm also giving away a copy of Firebrand. And what you need to do to enter is subscribe to the podcast, take a screenshot, email me at media@hustlingwriters.com, and of course, mention the book that you're entering for. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining me on my rejection story.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I feel I've learned a lot about myself with this conversation, so I'm very grateful.
I've learned a lot about you, so I really appreciate that.
This was My Rejection Story, hosted by me, Alice Draper. Thank you for listening to today's episode of My Rejection Story. I hope this conversation was as fun as I had recording it. I enjoy every episode. So just a reminder that you can win a copy of the book every single week. I do a giveaway of the author I interviewed. So if you love this conversation and you really want to grab your get your hands on a copy of the book, please enter the giveaway. All you have to do is subscribe and review the podcast and email me at media@hustlingwriters.com. And if you've already done it, you can do it from another app. And if you've already done it on all your apps, you could also just borrow a friend's phone, do it from a friend's phone, and let me know, like, when the screenshots that you did it on a friend's phone, because the more reviews and subscribes, the more likely I am to grow the show and make this podcast even bigger and better than it is, perhaps even get some funding, be able to invest money back in the show, and really just deliver on my promise to you, which is to make this as good as I can. So I just want to say a huge thank you quickly to my team, Christina Child, Samantha Dubé, and Chechofacho Ndabane. This show would not be here if it wasn't for them and their tireless work and belief in this mission. And then a huge thank you to the distribution partners. So there are some amazing people out here trying to get the word out to their networks, and also people that I think you will find extremely helpful, because if you want to write a book and get a book out there, these are experts in book writing and book publishing. So a couple of writing coaches who are highly recommended in my field: Emily Tameo Maher, Lindy Feel, Tracy Stewart, and Javasia Harris Bowler are all highly recommended writing coaches. And I know so many people who have used writing coach, and it's really helped them get the word out there and get the book out there and not just stay stuck in that draft phase. So their details are all in the show notes. And then also Nick Courtwright is the CEO of a hybrid publishing house, which is an interesting way of publishing a book, and it's highly recommended. Many of my clients have gone through it with great success. You can find out all of Nick's details in the show notes as well. And if you have any questions about them or need the contact details because for some reason you can't find them, pop me an email. And thank you again for listening to the show. I'll see you next week for another conversation. And yeah, have a great Wednesday.